Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, not to a grand palace or a bustling marketplace, but to a place where whispers became screams, and sanity was a luxury few could afford. You find yourself standing before the imposing, crumbling facade of one of Europe's oldest insane asylums, its very stones exhaling a chilling, silent sigh. The air here feels heavy, thick with the echoes of forgotten despair. A place where those deemed unwell were cast aside, not for healing, but for containment. Imagine the slow, creeping dread that would settle upon you as you were led through its iron gates, knowing that once inside, the world outside might cease to exist for you. It's a reality check that hits hard. These institutions weren't just buildings, they were often places where human dignity withered and vanished. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Is the sun setting, casting long, unsettling shadows where you are? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's truly disturbing journey together. You feel the cold, damp air seeping into your very bones as you stand at the overgrown entrance. The ornate, yet decaying iron gates groan softly as if protesting your presence. Ivy, thick as a man's arm, strangles the ornate stonework, pulling the building slowly back into the earth, but not before it tells its stories. This isn't just an old building. It's a monument to an era when the human mind was a terrifying mystery, and those who deviated from the norm were not understood, but feared. The term madhouse really wasn't far off the mark. As your gaze sweeps across the imposing structure, you notice the lack of conventional windows, or rather, the windows are mere slits, high up, barred, and darkened. They aren't designed to let light in, but to prevent escape. This architectural choice speaks volumes about the primary function of such institutions in centuries past. Custodial care, often masquerading as treatment. People weren't admitted. They were committed. And once committed, their identity often, dissolved, replaced by a diagnosis, a number, and a cell. Historians still argue whether these early asylums were born of genuine, if misguided, medical intent, or simply societal convenience to hide away the inconvenient. You can almost hear the phantom echoes of rattling keys, distant moans, and the shuffling feet of wardens. It makes you wonder, if these walls could talk, what horrors would they truly reveal? Perhaps the same horrors that played out in similar institutions across Europe, each with its own dark legend. It's enough to make you shiver, even wrapped in your coziest blanket. Honestly, if these walls had Yelp reviews, they'd be absolutely brutal. Terrible service, questionable therapies, and the constant screaming really put a damper on the ambience. Just kidding. Mostly that sheer scale of the place is disorienting. It sprawls a labyrinth of wings and courtyards, each one seemingly designed to disorient and isolate. You try to imagine the countless souls who walked these very halls, each one carrying a unique burden, a unique story. But those stories, more often than not, were never heard outside these walls. Fair. They were swallowed by the silence, by the fear, and by the sheer indifference of a society that didn't know, or perhaps didn't want to know, how to deal with the complexities of the human psyche. The very air here feels charged with residual K-emotion, a heavy blanket of forgotten despair that presses down on you, inviting you to listen to its whispers. You can't help but wonder if some of those whispers are still real. As you step further inside, the initial chill deepens, not just from the lack of sunlight, but from the palpable sense of history. You navigate through what must have been the reception area, imagining the terrified faces of new arrivals, stripped day of their belongings, their dignity, and often their names. The earliest approaches to mental health were, to put it mildly, less than therapeutic. You see, during the period when many of these European asylums were established, the prevailing belief was that mental illness was a form of moral failing, a sign of demonic possession, or simply a structural defect in the brain that could be corrected through extreme measures. Imagine the treatments you would have endured had you been admitted. Bloodletting, for instance, was a common practice, based on the ancient theory of humors. They believed that an imbalance in bodily fluids caused illness, so they'd simply cut you and drain some blood. Lovely, right? It's enough to make you feel lightheaded just thinking about it. Then there was purging, where powerful laxatives were administered to cleanse the system, and vomiting agents, which probably felt as pleasant as they sound. If you managed to survive those, perhaps you'd be subjected to hydrotherapy, which often involved prolonged exposure to extreme temperatures, like being strapped into a bath of icy water for hours, or scalded with hot water. The idea was to shock the system back to sanity. More often, it just shocked the system into submission. Beyond the physical, there were the psychological therapies. You might have been spun rapidly on a rotary chair, designed to reorient the brain. Sounds fun, like a carnival ride, right? Except the carnival ride was designed to induce extreme nausea and disorientation. Or perhaps the cribs and restraint chairs, which were less about comfort and more about immobilizing patients for days or even weeks. It makes you wonder if their goal was healing, or just ensuring you couldn't cause trouble. Historians still argue whether the extreme nature of these treatments reflected genuine medical ignorance or a more sinister, underlying desire for social control. It's a chilling thought that the very people tasked with your care might have been causing you more harm than good. You trace your fingers along a rough stone wall, feeling the cold seep into your fingertips. There's a peculiar, faint metallic scent in the air here, almost like old iron and something else, something indescribable. Perhaps it's just the decay, or perhaps it's a phantom echo of the very real fear that permeated these halls. It's a sobering thought that for many patients, the cure was often worse than the illness. SIM treatments, like the famous tranquilizing chair, designed by Benjamin Rush in the late 18th century, were meant to reduce pulse and muscular action by restricting movement and placing a box over the head. Sounds like a spa day. The idea of a spa day involves being tied down and suffocated. You can almost hear the soft, frantic breathing of someone confined, the quiet creak of wood under strain. It's hard to imagine the daily terror of living in such an environment, where help often came in the form of further pain or confinement. These early asylum practices weren't just archaic, they were profoundly dehumanizing, stripping away not just freedom, but identity and agency. And you, walking through these ghostly remains, are witnessing the silent testament to countless lives lived and lost in the shadow of treatment. Moving deeper into the asylum, you pass through a long, dim corridor, the air growing colder, heavier. This must have been where the patients' living quarters were, a place where individuality was systematically eroded. You imagine the countless souls who endured endless days and nights within these very walls, their lives reduced to a grim, monotonous cycle of confinement and care. Each patient, no matter their background, was stripped of their identity upon admission, their personal effects confiscated, their names sometimes replaced with numbers. They became simply the mad, categorized and catalogued. Consider the daily routine for a patient here. Awaking to the harsh clang of a bell or the jingle of keys, their days would have been rigidly structured, devoid of personal choice. Meals, often meager and bland, would be served in silence, perhaps in a communal hall under the watchful eyes of wardens. The concept of meaningful activity or therapeutic engagement, as we understand it today, was largely absent. Instead, patients might be put to work on the asylum grounds, performing menial labor, a practice that, while sometimes framed as therapy, often bordered on unpaid servitude. It makes you wonder how much healing actually happened, and how much was just a way to keep them occupied, or even profitable. For many, their only companions were the other patients, equally trapped and often equally distressed. Imagine the cacophony of sounds, distant cries, unidentifiable murmurs, perhaps the occasional outburst. These weren't quiet, sterile environments. They were often chaotic, overwhelming places where the line between sanity and madness blurred even for those meant to be sane. A mainstream historical fact about these institutions is that overcrowding was a rampant and persistent issue, exacerbating poor sanitation and contributing to the rapid spread of diseases, both physical and mental. It's hard to foster recovery, quote, when you're crammed into a space with dozens of others, suffering and perhaps dying. You press your hand against a cold, grimy wall and swear you can feel a faint vibration, a residual tremor of despair. It's the kind of place where even the silence feels loud, filled with unspoken stories. A quirky tidbit about some of these older asylums is the existence of what were known as padded cells, not for comfort, but to prevent self-harm in agitated patients. While seemingly humane, these often became places of extreme isolation, amplifying the very distress they were meant to alleviate. Imagine being in a room where every surface absorbed sound, leaving you alone with your own fractured thoughts. It's enough to make you feel a little stir-crazy just thinking about it. Honestly, if you were feeling a bit off before going in, you'd probably come out with a whole new set of issues. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of such restrictive environments was primarily for patient safety or simply a cost-effective method of control in an era when mental illness was poorly understood and often feared. The debates highlight the profound ethical dilemmas at the heart of these institutions. You walk past what might have been individual cells, their heavy wooden doors still ajar, revealing small, dark spaces. You try to picture a person's life unfolding within such confines, the hope, the despair, the slow surrender. It's a chilling reminder that these weren't just architectural structures. They were the silent witnesses to countless lost lives, their stories swallowed by the cold, unforgiving stone. As you continue your exploration, you can't help but notice how the very architecture of the asylum seems designed to amplify a sense of dread and confinement. This wasn't just a building. It was a carefully constructed cage. The corridors are long and narrow, seemingly endless, with high ceilings that dwarf you, creating an oppressive sense of insignificance. Light, where it exists, is sparse and cold, filtered through grimy, barred windows or non-existent altogether in deeper sections. It's like stepping into a waking nightmare, a feeling many patients must have experienced every single day. Consider dumb materials themselves. Rough-hewn stone, unforgiving brick, heavy iron, everything speaks of durability and immovability. There's little in the way of warmth or comfort. The walls seem to absorb all sound, leaving an unsettling quiet broken only by your own footsteps and the distant creaks of the aging structure. You imagine the maddening echo of a single scream reverberating through these empty halls, slowly fading into an even more profound silence. It's truly a place where silence wasn't golden. It was terrifying. Honestly, the interior decorator here must have been going through a really dark phase. Let's go with early oppressive and unrelenting despair for the aesthetic. A mainstream historical fact about many of these large purpose-built asylums is their panopticon-inspired designs, even if not strictly The idea was often to allow a single supervisor to observe multiple patients without the patients knowing if they were being watched. This constant surveillance, whether real or imagined, was intended to enforce discipline and control. You can feel that residual sense of being watched, even now. It's a subtle prickle on the back of your neck. You notice how few doors lead outside, and those that do are massive, reinforced, and clearly meant to be impenetrable. There are no welcoming courtyards or gardens designed for therapeutic strolls. Instead, any outdoor spaces would have been walled in, high and forbidding, ensuring no glimpse of freedom, no hint of the world beyond. This physical isolation mirrored the profound social isolation of the patients. They were not just removed from society, they were erased from it. A quirky tidbit is that some asylums, in their early design phases, even incorporated elements like underground tunnels or concealed passageways for staff to move unnoticed, or for the discreet removal of those who perished. It paints a picture of a place built not just for care, but for secrecy and control. You run your hand along a cold, damp patch on the wall, and the chill feels deeper than mere temperature. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for such grand fortress-like architecture was truly patient safety and long-term care, or simply a convenient, permanent solution for segregating undesirables from the general public. The debate continues, leaving a lingering question about the true intentions behind these imposing structures. You feel a strange sense of claustrophobia, a phantom pressure in your chest, as if the walls themselves are slowly closing in around you. The oppressive silence of the asylum is often broken only by the creaking of the old structure, the whisper of the wind through broken panes. But sometimes you feel it's something more. As you stand in what might have been a common area, perhaps a refectory or a day room, you start to notice things that hint at the unsettling occurrences reported by staff over the centuries. It's here that the line between historical fact and chilling folklore truly begins to blur. Imagine the long, dreary nights the wardens and nurses endured, often alone, separated by vast distances from the outside world. It was in these lonely boozers that whispers began to circulate, tales of unexplained phenomena that defied rational explanation. Doors would inexplicably open and close, faint disembodied voices would drift from empty rooms, and objects would sometimes move on their own. These weren't isolated incidents, but rather persistent occurrences that became part of the asylum's grim lore, passed down from one generation of staff to the next. You can almost feel a cold breath on your neck, even though there's no wind. Just a gentle nudge from beyond, perhaps. A mainstream historical fact is that many long-standing mental institutions, particularly those in isolated locations, developed a reputation for being haunted, fueled by the sheer volume of suffering and death that occurred within their walls. Staff, often overworked and underpaid, were frequently the first to report these strange happenings, attributing them to the restless spirits of former patients. It's easy to dismiss these as mere superstition, but when you spend your life immersed in such an environment, the boundaries of belief tend to shift. You walk into a small, dark room, its purpose unclear, but the air here feels particularly dense, a quirky tidbit. Some accounts from old asylum records describe instances where staff would hear phantom music or the faint sound of singing emanating from locked, empty wings, particularly during late-night shifts. Imagine hearing a lullaby, soft and melodic, drifting from a place where only despair resided. It's unsettling because it suggests a beauty, however fleeting, in a place of such profound ugliness. It makes you wonder if these were echoes of lost moments of joy, or something more sinister trying to lure you in. Honestly, if it were me, I'd probably be requesting a transfer to the less haunted leper colony. Historians still argue, whether these spectral tales were a coping mechanism for staff dealing with immense psychological stress, or if they represent genuine, albeit unexplained, paranormal occurrences tied to the tragic history of the asylum. The debate highlights the enduring mystery surrounding such places. You find yourself listening intently, trying to discern any faint sound beyond the gentle hum of your own breath. You feel the hairs on your arms rise, not from cold, but from an almost imperceptible shift in the atmosphere. The whispers are here, all right, if you just listen closely enough. The journey through this decaying asylum now brings you to areas that hint at even darker practices, a grim testament to the often barbaric medical approaches of yesteryear. You step into what might have been an examination room, or, more chillingly, a surgical theater. The air here is stagnant, heavy with the phantom scent of antiseptic and something else. Something metallic and visceral. Scent sends a shiver down your spine, far deeper than mere cold. This is where the true medical horrors unfolded, disguised as progress. Beyond the basic cures of bloodletting and purging, these institutions became unwilling laboratories for procedures. Today sound like something out of a horror film. Mainstream historical fact: lobotomies, though primarily popularized in the mid-20th century, had their conceptual roots and earlier, cruder variations experimented with in some asylums long before. Imagine being held down, fully conscious or barely sedated, while a doctor, perhaps with rudimentary tools, attempted to cure your mind by severing connections in your brain. It's a procedure so invasive, so irreversible. It makes you question the very definition of healing in that era. You feel a phantom ache behind your eyes, a sympathetic response to the unimaginable pain and terror endured by those subjected to such procedures. It's enough to make you wince. Then there was insulin shock therapy, where patients were deliberately put into a coma by injecting high doses of insulin. The idea being that the shock would somehow reset the brain. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it led to irreversible brain damage, and sometimes it led to death. And let's not forget electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, in its earliest unrefined forms, administered without muscle relaxants or anesthesia, leading to violent seizures and fractured bones. It's like they were playing a twisted game of fix the brain with a sledgehammer. A quirky tidbit that emerges from some historical asylum records involves the use of hydrotherapy gone extreme, beyond simple cold baths. Some institutions experimented with water torments, where patients were subjected to powerful jets of water, either scalding hot or freezing cold, often aimed at their heads, for extended periods. It was believed to calm agitated patients or shock catatonic ones back to responsiveness. It sounds less like therapy and more like a cruel interrogation technique, doesn't it? Honestly, if I went to a spa and they offered that treatment, I'd be asking for a refund and possibly filing a lawsuit. Historians still argue whether the medical professionals performing these radical and often destructive procedures genuinely believed in their efficacy, or if they were driven by desperation, a lack of alternative treatments, or even a twisted sense of scientific curiosity. The debate highlights the murky ethical waters in which early psychiatry often operated. You stand in the silence, and you swear you can hear the faint, desperate pleas that never left this room. The cold here isn't just from the drafts. It's a cold that permeates from the past, a chilling testament to human suffering for the sake of science. Your exploration now leads you to sections of the asylum that reveal the desperate, often tragic, attempts of its inhabitants to regain their freedom. You enter what appears to be a day room, still equipped with heavy, bolted-down furniture, clearly designed to prevent it from being moved or used as a tool for escape. The walls are scuffed and marked, perhaps from countless hands tracing patterns of longing, or frantic attempts to find a weakness. The very air seems to hold a residual tension, the ghost of desperate struggle. Imagine the crushing weight of knowing you were imprisoned, not by choice, but by a society that deemed you an outcast. The natural human instinct for freedom would not simply vanish. You can almost feel the burning desire for escape, the meticulous planning, the whisper of clandestine conversations in the dead of night. A mainstream historical fact is that escape attempts from asylums were far more common than official records often suggest, with many going unreported or simply logged as patient agitation or disobedience. These weren't daring Hollywood breakouts. They were often quiet, desperate bids for liberation. Fueled by sheer will, you might envision a patient meticulously picking at a loose brick in their cell, or hoarding a piece of cutlery to try and jimmy a lock. Perhaps they'd try to climb a drainpipe, or even attempt to overpower a lone attendant during a shift change. The risks were immense: brutal recapture, further punishment, or worse, succumbing to the elements outside if they made it past the formidable walls. It's a grim calculus, where the possibility of death might have seemed preferable to the certainty of perpetual confinement. Honestly, if I were stuck in here, my escape plan would probably involve politely asking for the nearest exit, then just quacking out, which, judging by the state of things, probably wouldn't work. You stand by a window, its bars thick and rusted, the glass opaque with centuries of grime. A quirky tidbit from the history of escape attempts involves the ingenuity of some patients. There are documented, albeit rare, cases of individuals creating intricate maps or tools from scavenged materials, like bones or pieces of metal, over years of silent effort. Imagine the patience, the sheer mental fortitude required to secretly craft a key from a spoon handle, all while under constant surveillance. It speaks volumes about the human spirit's unwavering refusal to be completely extinguished. Historians still argue whether the severity of punishments for escape attempts was a deterrent, or merely a confirmation of the asylum's underlying function as a place of incarceration rather than healing. The debate underlines the complex relationship between societal fear, medical practice, and human rights in these institutions. You feel a faint breeze brush past you, as if the spirit of a long-gone hopeful, but ultimately failed, escapee is still trying to find its way out. The phantom whispers you heard earlier now seem tinged with a quiet desperation, a yearning for liberty that never truly died. As you venture deeper, the architecture shifts subtly, becoming more austere, more forbidding. You sense a change in the atmosphere, as if you've entered the domain of those who held absolute sway over the lives within these walls. This section feels imbued with the ghost of power, sometimes wielded with benevolent intent, often with chilling indifference. You're now in the shadow of the asylum's dark figures, the superintendents, the doctors, and the chief wardens who govern this hidden world. Imagine the absolute authority these individuals possessed. For the patients, these figures were their entire universe, arbiters of their freedom, their treatment, and ultimately, their fate. A mainstream historical fact is that asylum superintendents often held immense and unchallenged power, operating with little external oversight. Their decisions, however subjective or misguided, dictated the daily existence of hundreds, sometimes thousands, of individuals. This autonomy, while perhaps intended to facilitate decisive action, often led to abuses. You might envision a stern-faced superintendent walking the halls with an air of clinical detachment, his gaze sweeping over the huddled figures, making life-altering diagnoses with a quick glance. Or a chief warden, his keys jangling, his presence instilling instant obedience, his methods perhaps more punitive than compassionate. It's a chilling thought, that your entire existence could be at the mercy of one person's whims or beliefs, however flawed. Honestly, if these guys had LinkedIn profiles, their job descriptions would probably include absolute monarchy, limited accountability. You find yourself in what might have been an administrative office, dust-laden files scattered on phantom desks, a heavy, imposing chair still in place. A quirky tidbit from some asylum histories reveals instances of superintendents or wardens engaging in peculiar personal projects or experiments on patients, sometimes driven by genuine though misguided scientific curiosity, other times by sheer eccentricity or darker impulses. Imagine a doctor meticulously cataloging peculiar behaviors or even collecting specimens from deceased patients, all in the name of advancing psychiatric knowledge. It's a stark reminder that the line between doctor and tormentor could become disturbingly blurred. Historians still argue whether the lack of accountability for these powerful figures was a systemic flaw of the era, reflecting societal attitudes towards mental illness, or a deliberate design to ensure the smooth, uninterrupted functioning of institutions often seen as social dumping grounds. The debate raises uncomfortable questions about complicity and responsibility. You feel a subtle coldness emanating from the empty office, a residue of the decisions made here, the lives altered, the fates sealed. The shadows seem to lengthen, stretching like the long, authoritarian arm of the asylum itself, still reaching out from the past. The path through the asylum now guides you to a more somber, hushed part of the grounds, a place often overlooked by casual explorers but central to the asylum's grim narrative. You're heading towards the overgrown, forgotten patient graves. The sense of unease here isn't just about what happened within the walls, but about what happened when a life ended, often unmourned and unburied. Imagine the sheer number of individuals who entered these institutions and never left. Their suffering, their struggles, their very existence often ended here, far from family, sometimes without a single soul to grieve their passing. A mainstream historical fact is that many asylums had their own dedicated cemeteries, often unmarked, or simply with numbered plots, reflecting the impersonal nature of their deaths and the stigma attached to mental illness. These were not places for dignified burials, but rather for quick, discreet interments. You step carefully, as if not to disturb the earth, knowing that countless forgotten souls lie beneath your feet. You might picture a bleak, rainy afternoon, a small group of attendants, perhaps a priest, hastily performing a short ceremony before lowering a simple pine box into the cold earth. No headstone bearing a name, no eulogy speaking of a life lived, just a number or a simple wooden marker, that would soon rot away. It's a chilling anonymity, a final erasure. Honestly, if there's an afterlife customer service department, these poor souls probably have a mountain of complaints about their burial. Arrangements that you notice patches of wild weeds growing particularly tall here, as if nourished by the forgotten stories beneath. A quirky tidbit from the annals of asylum history is the rare discovery of small, crudely carved personal tokens or mementos buried alongside patients in these unmarked graves. A button, a smooth stone, a fragment of cloth. These tiny, secret gestures of remembrance, perhaps placed by a fellow patient or a sympathetic attendant, are heartbreaking glimpses of humanity in a place designed to strip it away. It's a faint whisper of a protest against absolute anonymity. Historians still argue whether the practice of unmarked graves was purely a matter of cost-saving and efficiency, or if it also reflected a societal desire to distance themselves from those deemed insane even in death. The debate highlights the profound dehumanization inherent in the asylum system. You feel a profound sadness here, a quiet, aching sorrow that permeates the very ground. It's the silence of lives cut short, of stories untold, of identities deliberately erased, The weight of these forgotten graves presses down on you, a stark reminder of the asylum's ultimate, final act of containment. The journey through the asylum now brings you to the later stages of its grim existence, a period marked not by grand plans or horrific experiments, but by slow decay and eventual abandonment. You enter a vast hall, perhaps a recreation area, or a dining hall, but it's utterly desolate. Dust motes dance in the infrequent shafts of light filtering through broken windows, highlighting the sheer scale of neglect. This isn't the chill of active terror, but the cold, hollow emptiness of a place that has been left to die. Imagine the gradual decline, funds dwindling, staff morale plummeting, the public turning its gaze away from these forgotten institutions. A mainstream historical fact is that many large European asylums faced significant criticism and eventual closure during the mid to late 20th century due to changing psychiatric approaches, the development of new medications, and public outcry over the inhumane conditions that had become endemic. Deinstitutionalization became the buzzword, but the reality was often a messy, drawn-out process. You can almost hear the dwindling number of patients, their shuffling footsteps echoing in increasingly empty corridors. The machinery of care grinds to a halt, leaving behind only the shell of what it once was. Perhaps the last patients were transferred to smaller, more modern facilities, or simply discharged into communities ill-equipped to support them. It's a sad, quiet end, not with a bang, but with a whimper of neglect. Honestly, the level of abandonment here makes my personal procrastination habits look incredibly efficient. You notice peeling paint, crumbling plaster, and gaping holes in the ceiling through which you can glimpse the sky. Nature is reclaiming its territory, vines creeping through shattered windows, birds nesting in forgotten alcoves. A quirky tidbit about some asylums during their final years is the sheer volume of patient files and personal effects that were simply abandoned or hastily disposed of, left to rot in basements or attics. Imagine the untold stories, the medical histories, the forgotten identities, all decaying alongside the building itself. It's a tragic loss of human record, amplifying the anonymity of those confined. Historians still argue whether the swiftness and scale of deinstitutionalization movements truly benefited the former patients, or if it simply shifted the burden of care from large institutions to inadequately funded community services. The debate highlights a complex legacy that still resonates today. You feel a strange sense of peace in the silence now, a different kind of quiet from the one that preceded it. It's the peace of a long-suffering entity finally being allowed to rest, even if that rest is in decay. But beneath that peace, a cold, lingering question remains. What echoes did it leave behind? The asylum's silence, once filled with the ghosts of suffering, is now often punctuated by the crunch of footsteps, not of patients or staff, but of urban explorers, drawn to its decay. You find yourself navigating through shattered glass and fallen debris, the very air thick with the dust of collapse. This is where the historical horror meets modern fascination, but not without its own set of chilling risks. Imagine the allure, the thrill of stepping into a forbidden, forgotten world, untouched for decades. The crumbling grandeur, the haunting atmosphere, the morbid curiosity. But for those who venture into these abandoned behemoths, the dangers are very real. A mainstream historical fact is that structural instability is a major hazard in abandoned buildings, with collapsing floors, falling debris, and exposed rebar posing significant physical threats. You're not just walking through history, you're walking through a structural death trap. You might hear the sudden creak of a floorboard above, or the distant rumble of falling masonry, making your heart leap into your throat. It's a reminder that the asylum, even in its death throes, still holds power over those who trespass. Beyond the physical, there's the unseen danger, the residue of biohazards like asbestos and mold, clinging to the air, silently eroding your health. It's like the building itself is still trying to claim new victims. Honestly, if you're planning an urban exploration trip, maybe pick a well-maintained museum instead. Less tetanus, more ancient artifacts. Just a thought. You move carefully, shining your light into dark recesses, and you spot graffiti scrawled on a wall, a stark contrast to the historical decay. It's a sign of recent human presence, but it doesn't make the place feel any less desolate. A quirky tidbit is that urban explorers sometimes report unexplained technological malfunctions within these highly charged environments, freezing, batteries draining rapidly, or strange distortions appearing in photos or videos taken inside. It adds another layer of unexplained mystery, suggesting that perhaps some residual energy interferes with modern devices. Is it just the cold, damp air, or something else playing games? Historians still argue whether the romanticization of exploring these decaying institutions detracts from, or ironically highlights, the very real human tragedy that unfolded within their walls. The debate revolves around respecting the memory of those who suffered versus the impulse to document and experience forgotten history firsthand. You feel a strange sense of being watched, not by another living soul, but by the silent, brooding presence of the asylum itself. It tolerates your presence, for now, but its crumbling walls seem to whisper a warning. You move deeper into the heart of the asylum, where the sense of lingering torment becomes almost overwhelming. This isn't just about general suffering. It's about the specific energy that seems to cling to certain notorious rooms, places where profound despair, pain, or unspeakable acts may have occurred. You step into what feels like the darkest corner, and the air grows heavy, cold, almost breathless. Imagine standing in a padded cell, not just seeing it, but feeling the crushing isolation, the echoes of frantic screams that no one heard. Or perhaps a room that once held a restraint chair, where you can almost visualize a figure bound and struggling, their cries muffled by thick walls. A mainstream historical fact is that specific rooms within asylums often gained a sinister reputation among staff and later urban explorers due to documented severe patient incidents or alleged paranormal activity. These weren't just stories, they were places where the horror was concentrated, leaving a lasting impression. You feel a profound sense of psychological unease, a weight that presses down on your chest, making it hard to breathe. It's as if the very walls absorbed the anguish, and now they radiate it back. You might hear a faint, almost imperceptible whisper, or feel a sudden, inexplicable cold spot that moves with you. It's enough to make you instinctively look over your shoulder. Honestly, if this place had a TripAdvisor review, these specific rooms would get a 0-star rating with comments like, "Vibes are off the charts," but not in a good way. You approach a set of rusted metal doors, leading to what might have been an isolation ward. The air here is noticeably colder, thicker. A quirky tidbit from the history of such institutions includes accounts of unexplained indentations or claw marks appearing on the inside of seemingly impenetrable doors within solitary confinement areas, even after they had been freshly repaired. Was it the sheer desperation of human hands, or something else attempting to break free, or perhaps to break in? It hints at a struggle that transcends the physical. Historians still argue whether the perceived hauntings of specific asylum rooms are purely psychological phenomena, a result of human empathy reacting to immense suffering, or if there is indeed a measurable, residual energy imprinted on these spaces by extreme emotion. The debate delves into the very nature of memory and trauma, and how it might manifest. You stand in the silence, and you can almost feel the phantom weight of countless tormented souls, trapped in an eternal loop of their suffering, echoing their pain directly into your mind. Puff. Having explored the chilling physical spaces and sensed the lingering human anguish, your journey now turns towards the truly inexplicable. You're in a part of the asylum that feels particularly charged, where the veil between worlds seems thinnest. This is where the documented paranormal investigations come into play, where modern technology attempts to capture what history has only whispered. Imagine a team of ghost hunters, armed with EMF meters, thermal cameras, and voice recorders, venturing into these very halls at the dead of night. They aren't just looking for shadows. They're looking for evidence, for proof that the suffering imprinted on these walls extends beyond the living. A mainstream historical fact is that many abandoned asylums have become hotspots for paranormal investigators, drawn by their dark histories and the sheer volume of documented tragic deaths and intense, emotional suffering that occurred within them. It's almost a pilgrimage for those seeking tangible proof of the afterlife. You can almost hear the hushed voices of the investigators, the sharp beeps of their equipment, the sudden spikes on a digital readout. They're searching for something beyond rational explanation, hoping to record a disembodied voice, capture an anomalous temperature drop, or witness an object move without cause. You might feel a sudden, unexplainable chill, even though the room temperature hasn't changed, or hear a faint, distant whisper that sounds almost like a name. Honestly, if I were an investigator, my main equipment would be a very large, very comfortable pillow, because if anything shows up, I'm just going to try and sleep through it. You shine your flashlight into a particularly dark corner, and for a split second, you think you see a flicker of movement just at the edge of your vision. A quirky tidbit from many paranormal investigations in asylums involves the frequent recording of electronic voice phenomena, EVPs, disembodied voices, often faint and difficult to discern, captured on audio recordings when no audible sounds were present. These voices often seem to respond to direct questions, sometimes providing cryptic answers or repeating phrases from the past. Imagine asking, "Who are you?" and hearing a faint, tortured whisper respond, "Lost." Historians and perhaps psychologists still argue whether these documented ghostly encounters and unexplained phenomena are genuine evidence of residual hauntings or intelligent spirits, or if they are products of suggestion, pareidolia, or clever psychological tricks of the mind in highly atmospheric environments. The debate continues, leaving the ultimate question unanswered. You stand in the silence, and you can almost feel the presence of unseen eyes watching you, perhaps intrigued by your intrusion, perhaps resentful. The asylum, even empty, still holds its secrets, and some of them may not be entirely dormant. Your journey through the asylum, now steeped in its dark history and unsettling phenomena, forces you to confront a deeply troubling aspect of its existence, the enduring legacy of stigma. This isn't just about the physical structures, but about the societal attitudes that created and sustained them. You're now contemplating the unseen walls built around those deemed insane, long before they ever set foot in this place. Imagine living in an era when mental illness wasn't understood as a health condition, but as a moral failing, a punishment, or a sign of weakness. Deep pervasive fear and misunderstanding often led to ostracism, shame, and ultimately, forced confinement. A mainstream historical fact is that the social stigma associated with mental illness played a profound role in the creation and operation of asylums, driving families to hide away their afflicted members and society to demand institutions that kept them out of sight and out of mind. These places were not just hospitals, they were repositories for societal discomfort. You can almost feel the weight of judgment, the crushing burden of being labeled mad, stripped of your voice and agency. The very act of admission often meant a complete severance from your former life, a deliberate erasure. It's a chilling thought that simply having a mind that worked differently could lead to such a profound loss of self. You might imagine the whispered conversations, the averted glances, the sheer terror of families trying to conceal a loved one's struggle. Honestly, it makes you grateful for modern understanding, even if we still have a long way to go. Back then, a bad day might get you a lobotomy. You walk past what might have been a small, barred window, and you wonder if the faces that looked out were not just filled with despair, but with a burning sense of injustice. A quirky tidbit from the annals of social history reveals that some families would go to extraordinary lengths to officially declare a relative insane even if their symptoms were mild or situational, simply to avoid the social disgrace of having them visible in the community. Imagine a daughter being committed by her parents for merely defying their wishes, all under the guise of mental instability. It highlights the incredible power of societal pressure and the terrifying vulnerability of individuals. Historians still argue whether the extreme methods and long-term confinement of the asylum era were truly driven by a belief in their therapeutic value, or if they were largely a reflection of a society's desperate attempt to control and punish deviance from perceived norms rather than truly heal. The debate underscores the slow, painful evolution of mental health care. You feel a quiet anger simmering beneath the cold dread, a righteous indignation for the countless lives unjustly imprisoned and utterly forgotten, their only crime being a mind that wandered from the path society deemed normal. The echo of their forgotten struggles still permeates these walls, a silent plea for understanding. Your journey through the silent, decaying corridors of this ancient asylum now draws to a close, but the questions it raises, the mysteries it harbors, remain very much alive. You stand in what feels like the central nexus of the institution, a place where all the despair, the fear, the forgotten lives seem to converge. The air is thick with a heavy, lingering silence, punctuated only by your own breath. Imagine all the stories that these walls have absorbed, the desperate pleas, the unheard screams, the quiet surrenders. A mainstream historical fact is that, despite decades of research and forensic analysis, many patient records from these older asylums remain incomplete, illegible, or entirely missing, leaving vast gaps in our understanding of individual lives and the full scope of the institution's practices. It's a frustrating void, ensuring that many narratives remain forever untold. You feel the weight of these unanswered questions pressing down on you. Who were the people buried in those unmarked graves? What truly happened in the padded cells and the treatment rooms there? Did any of the patients ever truly find peace? Or are there echoes forever trapped within these crumbling confines? It's a chilling thought that the ultimate horror is not knowing, being left with only fragments and shadows. Honestly, if this place had a comments section for its history, it would be filled with way more questions than answers. You cast one last look around, your flashlight beam dancing across peeling paint and shattered glass. A quirky tidbit, often reported by those who frequent these abandoned sites, is the inexplicable phenomenon of phantom smells, the faint scent of antiseptic, old tobacco, or even fresh bread perhaps, from a long-gone kitchen, which appear and disappear without any discernible source. These merely tricks of the mind, or sensory echoes from a past that refuses to fade. It's a subtle reminder that the asylum might still be living in its own way. Historians and paranormal investigators still argue whether the unanswered questions surrounding asylums are simply a result of poor record-keeping and scientific limitations of the past, or if there is an inherent, unresolvable mystery to places of such concentrated suffering. Here, the debate continues, ensuring that the chilling presence of these institutions endures. You feel a final, cold touch on your skin, a whisper in your ear that sounds like a sigh, or perhaps a warning. The asylum has shared its secrets, but only those it chooses to reveal. Its true horrors may forever remain hidden, lingering in the shadows. Waiting for the next curious soul to listen, the light begins to fade outside. The last vestiges of daylight retreating from the broken windows, the old building settles, groaning softly, as if exhaling the last of its secrets into the encroaching darkness. You feel the stories, the sorrows, the lingering unease of this place begin to recede, but the echoes, they'll remain. Perhaps a faint whisper in the quiet of your room, or the fleeting scent of something unidentifiable. The asylum's legacy isn't just in its crumbling stones, but in the unsettling questions it leaves behind, stirring just beneath the surface of your own mind. It's a quiet dread that lingers, a subtle chill that may accompany you as you drift off.